Thank you for giving your time up and joining us today. So I've got a few slides to share with you, and I think it's important to try to get through these first before we go on to a Q&A session, because part of what we're talking about is methodology, and other parts are around some of the specific policy ideas and communications messages that have been developed by the BCCM over the last few months. So I'll start out by, and you should be able to see the slides moving here. I'll start out by just saying a little bit for those who don't know about Mutuo. Now, we've been working with BCCM since it was founded, and with Melina from the beginning, but we've been going since 2001, and we are a consultancy that works to try to improve the business environment for cooperatives and mutuals. And so what we've tried to do is to identify where there are shared issues and shared objectives between different types of cooperative and mutual business, and to work out how we can best communicate those in order to improve the business environment for our sector. And when I talk about some of the detail of what we are doing in Australia, then you can see how that might all start to fit together. Now, our approach is what we call a policy-led approach, and I will explain what that means as we go along. But we've been doing this since 2001 in the UK, and since 2013 globally. So we've been working in Australia, we've been working in the United States, in Canada, many of the European Union countries. And we work with individual businesses, peak bodies, some think tanks and policy developers. Actually, all of those, what they all have in common is either an interest in cooperative and mutual business, or they are cooperative and mutual businesses. So, we're going to talk about policy-led influence, and you can see from this array of examples that we have produced a range of policy influence guides for different types of mutuals in different jurisdictions to try to provide a resource which can be used by those businesses to improve the understanding of them and how they can influence their own targets. So in these examples, you've got Australian, we've got global insurers, the International Cooperative Alliance, and some British examples, and also a European policy example. So they're variations on a theme, but all of them are designed to provide this basic resource, just like the blueprint we're going to talk about today. So, okay, what do we mean by policy-led influence? Well, as I said at the beginning, our objective is to help to create the best business environment for cooperative and mutual enterprises. We have to recognise that we're not the ones that make the rules. There are effectively three different strands that we need to consider in all of this. One is the legislation that we all work under, and we have to operate within what the corporations law says. The second is where we are regulated businesses, what regulators, either centrally, such as ASIC, or through specific business sectors, such as financial regulators and other regulators, and competition regulators, how they affect our day-to-day work. And we want to influence both of those so we can improve the environment. So the third sort of leg of all of this is the policy basis for it, because that's the most important aspect of what we're trying to do when we're influencing our targets. And our targets are government and policymakers. So when we try to influence people through policy, what we're trying to do is to get them to understand that we have an understanding of their issues and try to get them to understand our issues and to develop them through policy ideas. But we need to know who the targets are. We need to know who we're trying to influence. Is it just government ministers? Is it a particular agency? And we need to be clear about what we want them to do. I'll go through some of the ideas and also some of the pitfalls that people sometimes fall into. But the idea of policy-led influence, as I shall explain, is about the methodology that we adopt and how we actually get people to agree that we have a good message, a good set of objectives, and then to get them to act on them with us. So the first aspect of all of this, and this won't be, I should have really said it at the beginning, a lot of this will be obvious to some people, but not necessarily everybody. And certainly when we talk about the targets, and the targets in Australia being government ministers, opposition politicians, regulators, and other decision makers, it's really important that they know what we're talking about. What is a cooperative and a mutual? And too often you will find that when you talk to people about co-ops and mutuals, they'll say, yeah, I know all about that, but it's actually only based on one particular experience that they've had. Or maybe they're a member of one organisation and they think that all co-ops and mutuals are like that. They may have even had a negative experience of it, and that's something that has to be overcome. So the first thing is we need to educate them about all the different types of cooperatives and mutuals so they know what we are talking about. The second part of all of this is showing the value of co-op and mutual businesses. I mean, you can say, oh yeah, there's all these co-ops and mutuals in all these different industry sectors, and they could easily say to you, well, so what? What difference does that make? And this is really important for us to be clear about. What is it that is valuable about our sector? Why is it important to have a cooperative and mutual sector? And if you think more broadly, you sort of take a step back really from the day-to-day lobbying and the day-to-day issues that you might be involved in as a business, and you think about why there are cooperatives and mutuals in the economy and our society and what we want to achieve through those businesses, you start to then get into a different conversation with people about the reason for taking action to assist our sector. So the biggest pitfall, and the one I would always urge against, is the risk of issuing a shopping list of demands. And this is sort of traditional old-fashioned lobbying methodology, which is we've got all these things that need fixing and just go along and try and get people to agree with you. I guess in a lot of ways, what we're trying to do in terms of communicating our messages is to put ourselves into the shoes of the people we're trying to influence, so that they can we can start to present our messages in ways that they will understand and will reflect the ways that they think. The truth is that you don't have politicians waking up in the morning and thinking about mutuality and thinking about cooperatives. They think about the issues that are affecting them. Look at the Banking Royal Commission. This is the big story of the week. Everybody's talking about it. Everybody's thinking about it. They're not thinking about it in terms of, I don't know, we could talk about corporate diversity and the importance of having different behaviours in marketplaces. Our job is to present what we want in a way that fits into that broader agenda and fits into the way that they think and gives us a better chance of them acting on our behalf. So in a positive way, instead of asking for things, we should be offering things. We should be starting to think about what we can offer as solutions to help with government priorities. And it doesn't really matter whether you are particularly attached politically to a particular government priority, but if it's around competition and choice, then we should be thinking about how we can present ourselves as increasing competition and choice? If it's more about protecting consumers, how can we present ourselves as doing that? If it's about domestic ownership, what is it we can say that actually speaks to that agenda? And so you can see what we're doing is we're flipping over from just going and asking for stuff and offering solutions that show how our businesses can actually be a participant in helping to deliver the things that they already want. This is really important because then we've got politicians who know why they should help. Don't forget, you get up in the morning as a minister, you're going to have a full diary of meetings, and you'll be meeting all sorts of people, all asking you for stuff, day after day, hour after hour, and you've got to sit there and listen to it. The stuff that's going to cut through is the stuff that helps you, the stuff that helps you to solve your problems, rather than the people that come along giving you additional ones. So just think about that as we go through. So this graphic just summarizes all of that. The foundations to influence. Crucially, you have to have the facts about what you're talking about. Key statistics are really important. Size does matter in terms of influence. We've got to be able to talk about how our businesses are relevant to the economy and society, how they fit into the zeitgeist of what people are talking about. Post-GFC, for example, what is it that we can do that is different? How can we change behaviours of business? When people are talking about executive remuneration, is there a different story in the cooperative and mutual sector? And then what is the potential for our sector? You know, what could we be? We know what we are. We know what we've been for decades. A lot of people spend a lot of time talking about the past. But what is the potential? What could this sector do as we go forward? And then you start to get into a different level of conversation with politicians. So these three, things, you've got the shopping list items in the sector's objectives, the things that we want, the things that we know are important. What is coming along from the outside? What are the politicians' objectives? What are the stories of the day? What's happening in the rest of the world? And blend those together into workable proposals. Once you've got workable proposals that actually fit both what we need as a sector and also what is acceptable and part of the real world, then we've got a chance for some workable proposals that are going to improve the business environment. And we'll talk specifics in a moment about that. So going back to the resource, BCCM has produced a blueprint for an enterprising nation. And the idea is that this is the document that gives us a consistent messaging platform so that we're saying the same stuff, we're saying it in the same way, and we are able to coordinate how we present ourselves as a sector. This isn't something that Melina does just on her own in Canberra. This is something that everybody does whenever we meet politicians, whenever we have something going on in our local electorates, whether we have something going on in Canberra as a business, and what we can do as a sector, because this consistent messaging is the way for us to break through. So the resource is produced as a PDF. You can also get it from the BCCM website, where it's completely accessible to all of you. And there's now a new app, and I'll say a couple of things about that as we go through, but the app is a handy way of keeping it in your pocket, so you can quickly refer in any meeting to a lot of the points that we're talking about. But it has those facts about cooperatives and mutuals, including the stuff that, maybe, privately we might be a bit embarrassed to admit we don't know about other sectors. We might be in the agricultural sector and we don't know what's going on in the customer-owned sector, or vice versa. We've got to understand how they operate across Australian business, and very importantly, which industry sectors they are present in, because this is a very significant thing to remember today. We can talk about cooperatives and mutuals, we can talk about them in the generic sort of way, but this all sounds very theoretical until we talk about the industries and the specific businesses that we are representing and we are trying to improve the business environment for. So having a good understanding of the full breadth of different industry sectors starts to change that conversation from one just about some idea of a business into something that's practical, that you can then show with real examples and proof that it has a role to play in Australian business. And that's really important when we talk about what these deliver for Australia. And the blueprint has a great deal of ideas around that. So, you know, when you go to the sections on what they can deliver as a sector, you know, you start at the top of the hierarchy, which is that, you know, these are different kinds of businesses. These have businesses with a different purpose. They're not just about making money for their shareholders. They're about providing services in different ways, and often they're about providing services that couldn't be provided any other way. So we've got to be able to, if we're from the customer-owned sector, be able to describe the importance of customer ownership, why it's different, why it has different outcomes, why it's better in many cases. And there's no better example at the moment than in banking, actually. But equally, if we're talking about cooperatives of producers, other business owners, consortia, and purchasing cooperatives, you know, what is it that they can do that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise? You know, I mean, and, you know, to us on a daily basis, this is, you know, fairly straightforward. But being able to explain that and why that's important, why it allows small businesses to play in bigger markets, why it allows them to get economies of scale, why it improves the entrepreneurship of regional Australia, all those facts need to be able to be presented. And what this document does is it tries to identify what are the big selling points of each of the different industry sectors. We don't have time today to go through every single industry sector, so excuse me if I don't mention yours when we're just picking out some examples. But then, of course, you know, we're in the business of influence. We can educate, we can show why it's important to help, but we've then got to say what it is we want from government, you know, what it is about the policy framework, about the legislative environment, and about the regulatory environment that needs to change to make things better for these kinds of firms. So we go into detail of the three types of CME, customer-owned, worker-owned, producer-owned, all these different types of businesses. The fact that the business purpose is different depending on the type of business and the industry that they operate in. We talk about numbers. You can find within the document facts and figures. You can cross-reference this with the National Mutual Economy Report, which goes into further detail about the size and the impact of cooperatives and mutuals in Australia. We then talk about the different business sectors that are represented within the BCCM and where cooperatives and mutuals are playing a part. And so you can see, just taking a look at this slide, you can see from the whole array of different business sectors that just talking about co-ops and mutuals in a generic way doesn't always work. You've got to have messaging that is specific to the different types of co-ops and mutuals, and that those businesses can use, because ultimately BCCM is here to provide value to the Australian business, cooperative and mutual business sector. And so you've got to see stuff that's relevant not just generically, but also specifically to your industry sector. And in many ways, this is the innovation of this particular version of the blueprint, which goes into a lot more detail now and intends to improve and increase that level of detail over the next period, so that we can speak more directly to the objectives that you have as individual businesses. So you've seen the different sectors. Each sector has its own proof points. And when you go into the blueprint document and you go into the website and the app, you can see all of these proof points which talk about the value of each of the sectors to the Australian economy. and providing proof points which we update on a regular basis, which we will use in our media work, in our communications work. And as I said at the beginning, if we get this right consistently, we can start to use as a sector with the individual businesses. I should add, before we go on to talk about any of the specifics, however, that these proof points rely on you. At the end of the day, we've got to be telling the truth, and we've got to be telling compelling stories about co-ops and mutuals. And to be able to do that, we need you guys to help us to provide the proof points. And when you see some of the examples of them, you'll see that there is a direct opportunity for you to contribute, tell your stories, and engage with BCCM to improve those proof points. And these will continually be updated and continually improved again over the next period. So I've just got a couple of screenshots here from the app, which gives you an idea of how all of this is arranged. So, imagine this on your smartphone. You've got one of these screens in front of you with all the different ideas, and you want to go into a meeting, and you've got to remind yourself what the generic messages are about cooperatives and mutuals, and what are the things that you want to say about your particular sector. So if you would touch on talking points as your first place to start, you'd get to another screen which breaks it down into the individual sectors. You're not going to be, as an agricultural cooperative, going in and talking about healthcare and community co-ops. You just want to talk about the things that matter to you. So here's an example of healthcare, primary healthcare cooperatives. And you touch on the icon for healthcare, and you get the talking points about why these types of businesses have something to offer the Australian economy and society. And these are the talking points that we would see as being the beginning of the conversation with the targets that we are addressing. Beyond the talking points, you then have proof points, which is evidence that backs up those claims, that provides the proof of the arguments that we're putting forward. So you can see the hierarchy working down, sort of pyramid-like, with the points of why you've got cooperatives and mutuals in your economy, moving on to why they're in different sectors of the economy, what they can achieve for the Australian economy and business environment, and then providing the proof to back all of that up. And I'm just going to give you very quickly 3 examples. These are screen grabs from the website. So you can see that, you've got a bullet point, a dot point, which is then followed by justification. And within the website, you then get some facts that will back it up. So, 3 things to say about purchasing and supply services. Say you're Capricorn, well, Capricorn facilitates independent business owners to benefit from economies of scale. There's the proof behind it. It supports and encourages entrepreneurship. It lowers input costs and improves business productivity and efficiency. And there's more to be found. This is just a screen grab, but it gives you an idea of what we have for each of the separate industry sectors. And you can see that that's a message that's been tailored for the industry sector. Rather than talking just generally about co-ops and mutuals, it's talking about co-ops and mutuals operating in this way, what they can achieve and what that structure permits them to achieve. Another example would be customer-owned banks. Might be familiar to a lot of people on the call at the moment, but offering better value financial services products, price competition against the profit-maximising competitors, better customer service. You could add a whole range of other things. I know if you go to the website and read through the blueprint, there are additional points, but you can see the gist of this. It's specific to the type of customer ownership and the behaviours of the banks. And also when you get to the proof points, it then has more of the topical stuff around the Royal Commission and why is it that it's not customer-owned banks that are in the dock over the Royal Commission? Why is it that they have behaved differently? Well, we can address those points and speak to those in a way that are actually topical and good for influence. Third example, I've just picked these three out of the more than a dozen that we have on the website. But mutual health insurance, completely focused on customers' needs rather than needs of any investors. So that's a big difference between, let's say HCF to Bupa. Offer lower premium healthcare, which creates competition in the market. They're important for competition. They're important for keeping prices down and stopping the price gouging of other players, keeping them honest, if you like, and offering better quality products that their members appreciate more, their members and customers appreciate more than many of their competitors do. And so, again, each of these has to be backed up with proof. But you see how you are presenting different types of co-ops and mutuals in different ways depending on the messaging that you've got. So the app also has a range of other information which is drawn directly from the BCCM website. So if you want to just pick up on what's going on, what's happening, what are the key areas of interest, what submissions we're making to different inquiries, etc. All of that is easily accessible through the app, and I would encourage you, if you haven't downloaded, if you're able to get hold of it. So I'm going to finish now with an example of how this whole thing then sort of rolls together, because as much as we talk about industry sectors and wanting to have specific messaging for the different industry sectors or the different types of co-ops and mutuals, there are times when groups of them have a shared interest and shared issues where they want to come together and try and solve that in a coherent way. And one of these has been the BCCM Capital project, which some of you will know a lot about, others might not know much about. But the idea in 2015 was that there could be a new capital instrument. This idea was floated for mutuals that were registered under the Corporations Act to be able to issue capital that was permanent capital but didn't risk demutualising the business. That's the shorthand way of putting it. Couldn't be done unless there was new legislation. So the solution was understood right at the beginning of where we had to finish this and target this work. So how did we get there? We started with the same approach that the blueprint is suggesting for different sectors. So a Senate inquiry into the business environment for cooperatives was not just about talking about it, it was about educating senators. It was about giving us the opportunity to speak to them about all the different types of cooperatives and mutuals, what they can achieve for the Australian economy and society, educate and inform parliamentarians, and get them on our side, get them to understand why they should be supportive of it. And it was a phenomenal success, because within a year, we ended up with 17 bipartisan recommendations for improvements to the business environment for co-ops and mutuals. And one of those, or two of them, were about raising capital. So far so good. We get the politicians on board. The politicians send the report to the Treasury, and the Treasury officials say, nah, that's not what we want to do. We're not interested in that, because they're still behind the curve. They haven't been brought up to speed. Don't forget, BCCM's only been going for a couple of years at this time. So it's running to catch up, to establish this idea that there is a cooperative and mutual sector and that it can work together and it can deliver all these different things. So the Treasury officials recommended to ministers they shouldn't do anything. What happened next was proof that this policy-led work is successful. Scott Morrison was the Treasurer at the time, and he overruled his officials because the parliamentarians, the politicians, had been effectively lobbied and effectively influenced to the point through this process and using this methodology that they should take action to support the co-op and mutual sector. And so he ordered the Hammond Review, which reviewed the Treasury advice and reviewed all of the recommendations of the Senate committee. And then, to cut a long story short, the government accepted all of Greg Hammond's recommendations and decided to legislate. And on Wednesday this week, we will see a bill in Parliament which has new legislation for mutuals for the first time in 18 years, anything having happened in Parliament for our sector in that way. So hopefully I've given you a very quick idea of how we have approached the methodology for this, what the resource is that's been provided through BCCM that you can use, and we would encourage you not just to use it, but to help us to improve it, to make it better, to increase the level of proof behind it, but also give you an idea of this not being just theoretical. This is something that's already working in Australia, and it's already succeeding with our target politicians. So that's all I wanted to say in terms of the, oh, look at that, 30 minutes, in terms of the presentation. But we're open now. I'm going to hand over back to Melina for the opportunity for you to give your reflections and to give any ideas that you may want to put forward.
Thanks very much, Peter. I'm just going to, so this doesn't sound like just headless voices, I'm going to start the video. We don't have any questions yet, which is fine. Perhaps you've just enjoyed listening, but I do encourage you to either if you'd like to share something, share some reflections, or ask something further, to use the Q&A dialogue box, or in fact you can unmute and simply talk to us. So I'll just put the room camera on. It's so you can see us down the back of the room. So thanks very much again, Peter. Just to reiterate something that Peter was saying, we've created the message platform to work both from a generic point of view, the overall narrative of the important role of cooperatives and mutuals in the economy and to community development is part of the raison d'etre of the BCCM. It's very important, however, that you use oh, thank you. I've got a question coming in. That you think of the blueprint as also being an opportunity to use those underlying messages to support or strengthen your own advocacy and reform issues with government, particularly if you've got a regulatory or a legislative block to business performing at its optimal level. The BCCM was formed to bring businesses together to create a better business operating environment for cooperatives and mutuals. So this is really what underlies the whole motivation for creating the message platform. Please come and talk to us if you would like some more bespoke or customised help for your own sector or indeed your own business in relation to something that might be inhibiting business performance. And we can help shape that narrative in a way that may in fact support the thing that you're lobbying for, as well as the generic lobbying that we're doing around issues such as access to capital, or indeed some emerging issues around competition, the right for cooperatives and mutuals to compete in the economy in different markets. How do you get the blueprint? We've just had a question around the PowerPoints. The PowerPoints are available. The blueprint is available in soft and hard copy, and also is in fact replicated in the members' mobile phone app. So there are lots of different ways to have the blueprint for use amongst your own teams at work. So please, if you haven't got access to any of the soft copies or the other applications, please let us know. And it's really important that we work together. The blueprint is an iterative document, and it's been created with you, with the sector, with the members. We've developed the blueprint out of an active dialogue with our members in terms of what are the crucial issues that need identifying and acting on in terms of a more enabling environment. Your proof points, the evidence that when you win awards, when you are part of industry-wide benchmarking, when there is other evidence emerging that your businesses are performing above average or certainly leading in markets, we can use these to keep a very active conversation around what is the evidence for the important role of cooperatives and mutuals. So we really appreciate your help in providing that evidence base. And your feedback as well. Bruce from GoVita has asked that given Parliament is only sitting for 2 weeks, what's the realistic expectation of the bill passing? This is the Access to Capital, the Mutual Reform Bill. I think that's a great question. I might hand over to Peter to let you know what we think about its level of priority.
Okay, so theoretically, there is time for the bill to pass, but it's extremely tight. It's a small window, and that means it would have to be completed through both houses by the time of the budget, which is, the 3rd of April. So I would say that it's theoretically possible, but realistically, it's likely that it will probably only achieve part of its journey through Parliament. Now, having said all of that, we've pulled out all the stops this week to try to improve the level of priority that's being given to it. And, given that it was something that the Prime Minister, when as Treasurer, he took a personal interest in this, if we can, in the next few days, help them to remember this and to take action on it, then we do have bipartisan support. So, there are mechanisms within the parliamentary process for this to be passed in time. However, the most important thing is that the bill gets published, because once the process starts, even if it's held up by a general election, it can then be completed by whoever the new government is. And the good news in all of this is that we have a commitment from Labour that should they be the government, that they would pick it up right at the beginning of their administration, because the benefit of having it published is that it's what I would call oven-ready legislation. It's ready to go. Anybody can pick it up and take it forward. We are ultimately, like everybody else, in the hands of the parliamentary process, and the fact that there is so little time available to debate means that it is a very narrow window. So theoretically possible, likely not to get all the way through before the budget, but we are very positive that it will be taken up very soon. So you can expect this to reach royal assent within the next few months.
I think that the question is very important in terms of, and thank you, Bruce, for focusing on priority. The objective and the motivation behind having a blueprint strategy is, in fact, to create this environment where government is incentivised to make things priority. With priority comes reform and action, and that's what we're attempting to do in whatever area of legislative or regulatory reform that we're acting in. It's also very important that we work very closely with our colleagues across industry sectors. So in the customer-owned banking sector with COBA, we work with Industry Super Australia in relation to industry and mutually owned funds. We work collegially with the health mutual sector. We need to ensure that we're joining up our messaging and our advocacy to have the most powerful impact as a joined up effort, and on behalf of ourselves as individual organisations. So again, if you would like any help or ideas, or perhaps just a sounding board for the approach that your business or your sector might be taking in relation to advocacy around some key issues that you're facing, please do come and talk to us, because this is something that we can genuinely help with and assist with in terms of the joined up advocacy piece as well. Given that there aren't any more questions coming through or comments, I think that we will wrap the webinar up. I thank you very much again for joining, taking time out of your day. We will send the PowerPoints to everyone who's on the call this morning, and there's also a recording made of this webinar for people who weren't able to join. thank you again, and we look forward to joining our advocacy together in this very important election year. We have the New South Wales election as well, so plenty going on electorally, and I feel it's a very strong year for getting some of the reforms we've been fighting so strongly for together, actually through to delivery, and I look forward to working with you all on that. Thanks to Peter for your contribution today.
Thanks, Melina. Thanks, everybody. Nice to see you.
Thanks again. Bye.